kickstart the economy. So, understanding that context is really important. And if we don't understand that context, we will not understand why banks are not lending to us, why there's no interest from mainstream in building in a better way. And we have to start examining the paradigm which we're operating within. You know, this increase in debt money and in bank-created money has skewed a lot of things. So that our policies now all have to be about growth, but the government itself has no ability to do anything about it because all the money is channeled through banks. And if we don't understand that, then our sustainability and ethical approach is going to keep on coming up against barriers which are very self-defeating. So I've been, my last thing is that I've started to work with UCL on something called unintended consequences. And unintended consequences are just why things don't work out as you intend them to. So I had a business plan for these thermoplan blocks. It didn't work out as I intended it to. That was an unintended consequence. Sometimes unintended consequences are direct. You want to do something and you don't get there. Sometimes there are side effects. And the side effects can be very significant as well. And the reason why that's important to understand, because if we are a business person, all right, and our only interest is in making as much money as possible, if that's the judgment criteria for business, then maybe you're not interested in side effects. It doesn't matter if you destroy a community or a habitat or something else, because you're only judging it in one way. But once we start talking about unintended consequences and success and failure, then we immediately start getting into value systems. You can't say that something is a success or failure unless you have a value system to actually start making those criteria. And I've done a whole load of work, and I think we've run out of time, unfortunately, so I'm not going to be able to go into it at the moment, about how those unintended consequences, how we might value them, how we might learn something from what we're doing. But if someone says to me, you failed in business, which is sort of, in business terms, I didn't make a profit, right? But there were other goods that came out of that, then is that a failure? It's a failure in business terms, but is it a failure in other terms? And we have to say the same thing for policies. So if you have a policy which is to decarbonise the built environment, but it creates lots of sick buildings, or creates a lot of poverty or unemployment, but it solves the carbon problem, is that a success or a failure? And the questions of context are very important then, because if we don't understand the knock-on effects of what we're doing and why we might fail or succeed because of those other influences, if we don't understand those things, then we are going to be drifting in the dark. We're going to be potentially creating more problems than we are solving. And my submission is that actually most of the policy work and most of the stuff we're doing in sustainability in the built environment at the moment is becoming part of the problem rather than part of the solution. Why would that be? It will be because actually what we're doing is we're working within a paradigm which is saying that the main thing is to keep growth going, economic growth going. The main thing is to solve single focus problems without looking at the wider change that we need to actually make a sustainable society. And so in order to be able to deal with some of those things, we need to create a space to actually examine the context a bit better. We need to see the built environment in the context of our total environments, but we also need to spend time thinking about values. What is it that's important to us? Because actually, if I was a success in business and I lost my soul, from a personal point of view, that wouldn't be a good result. And that is the danger that we have with what we're doing. If we're not actually really thinking about the value systems that we're part of and taking a very broad view of the sector we're working in and the issues that are actually affected. So I think I've probably said enough. I'm sorry I didn't get to the end of my talk, but I hope that at least was stimulating.
I think the most important test of a talk is the extent to which it prompts questions. So, Louise, questions, please.
Yeah. What is your opinion on autoclave in concrete blocks?
That's a very technical question. Again, I think that when you're looking at an environment, what is the sustainability of a product? There are a number of things, right? There's sort of technical things, which is what is the embodied impact, what are the resources used. There's the use factors. Does it actually help us to build better performing buildings and so on? But there's also a very big difference between a product and a material, in my opinion. And that is not really understood, that a product has a provenance. It comes from a particular place, it comes with a particular support, with a particular ethic. And actually, one of the worst things about the Green Guide was that it was only about materials. In fact, it wasn't even about materials. It was put together as a system so you couldn't actually see what was in it. But actually, a concrete block imported from Australia or a concrete block made down the road has a completely different impact. But also, if a product comes with support with a relationship, to me, that makes it quite different from something which doesn't come with that backup and the support and the relationship. So I think we need to really clearly differentiate between products and materials. And you can't say that any material is necessarily better than another material. I mean, if you say earth is a great material for building with, but if you fly it over from China, well, does that make it a great material?
Yes.
Yeah, generally speaking, obviously, I understand we need to look at the wider picture, but what do you think government can do to support house builders like yourself to develop low carbon housing? Yeah, obviously, there's no easy solutions, but if you were to take, say, 2 or 3 key points to
Yeah, I do a lot of work with government, and I think there are certain things you can amend, but I think that the way that they are at the moment, the context in which they're working, it's very difficult for them to do things. They don't control the money supply, but all the quantitative easing, everything's going straight into the banks and then straight out. So it's well, not straight out, it's just going into the banks. If it was going out, it'd be okay. They also have this, they seem to be set in this growth paradigm. And I do think there's a real conflict between economic growth goals and sustainability. I don't think it takes a lot of really deep thinking to work that out. So how do you start to address those issues if you're working in government? I know a lot of really good people working in government, but they're caught within these parameters, and it's been driven by this particular model of what progress is, basically.
Do you think it would happen then at a local level rather than central?
Well, the thing is that we've been talking in UCL about setting up a centre for context and change. One is we have to understand context, but the other is we have to understand how we get change. We're not thinking about that enough. Most of our understanding of change is based upon the paradigm which we're in. So we think it happens in a particular way because that's how everyone tells us it happens. It may be, when you think about the built environment, the best place to start in the built environment is not in the built environment, but is in allotments. Because actually you need to get the community together before you can start doing things at a local level. We need to think differently about that. And until we find the space to start thinking about it, we're going to continue to blunder around in the dark, potentially creating more problems and also reinforcing things which we don't really believe in, which are actually part of the problem in the first place.
Yes.
I've been going to the EcoBuild show on and off over a few years, and I think it's next week.
Yes, it is, yeah.
And more and more, the question that you've put has occurred to me, is there any point in the EcoBuild show? We see all these marvellous things, but do they ever happen in construction?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not saying, this is not a situation where we say, well, we can't do anything now. Yeah. There are certain things that we can solve. We need to divide so unintended consequences and our failures into different categories. There are things which are simple and solvable. There are things which are more complex, and I was going to talk about the complexity factors and so on. And there are things which are contextual, which actually we can't solve by our standard way of working within the paradigm. The eco-build is not, it's all within that paradigm. So it's trying to make a business, it's exactly what I've been trying to do, out of sustainability. The eco-build, if anyone's been for it the last few years, it's just become a major building show. There's nothing to do with eco, and that's an inevitable consequence of the fact that there aren't any real drivers for proper sustainable building and thinking, and in fact there are many barriers on the contrary. So I mean it's good to go if you're interested in a few new things, but I don't, we're doing something really interesting. But we're NBT actually we've been struggling in this sector because what we've been trying to do is hold on to some of the integrity, and we're now moving from trying to sell products to trying to sell performance, because we think you need to start thinking about performance-based solutions. And if we do that, we might shame some other people into thinking about actually what the results of their activities are.
Yes. 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 I think government can only really do three things. It can persuade people into changing their action. It can incentivise them in some way, or it can regulate. I don't know why I was on your background in the latter era. As you say, this government is something of a dilemma. It's trying to promote growth, and yet it still claims it wants to be the greenest government ever. There are big issues, as you know, about whether there are going to be any changes to Part L this year. What would you like to see the government doing differently, which might get slightly closer to what you've been talking about this evening?
Well, within the constraints that it has, if it doesn't, I mean, I would say that we do need to continue to think about performance. I think that regulation or compliance in that area is important, because there's a certain point where people say, well, I'm buying this, it says it's going to be like this, and it's actually only half of this. I think that is really important. I think it can start to open up questions of health and well-being through some legislation and through some tools it has. And in fact, I'm working with the government, with DEC, on trying to get a guidance tool for traditional buildings, which does put those issues of health and comfort, as well as energy and health and heritage, as well as energy, on the table. And I think if government can find a way to open up questions about bigger issues, then that's very important. But quite often the government has no interest in that, because if the growth agenda is so strong, it just needs to get things going. And you have Mr. Pickle saying, let's get rid of all the regulations and all the tape, because we just need to let this thing, fly. Then that is not necessarily going to happen, is it? I mean, there was an interesting quote from Caroline Spellman in 2010 at the Biodiversity Conference, and I'll just read it out because I think it's worth quoting. She said that nature provides countless services for free, but we need to take steps now to protect and improve it before we lose those benefits for good. If we get it wrong, growth will be curtailed. This is why we must reach a new target to reduce the loss of species. And actually, you can't have your cake and eat it sometimes. And I don't think actually it's to do with government. I think it's to do with us. I think the one thing I was going to say at the end, because I completely ran out of time as usual, was that that there isn't anyone going to do this, and you're not going to get funded to do it, all right? Because it doesn't exist within the paradigm. It doesn't meet the EPSRC standards or the TSB standards, because you're trying to do something. You're trying to think about things in a different way, and we need to be very, take personal responsibility for that and create something which actually does start to drive change. But we need to create the space and the mental space to do that first, because if we don't, we are going to be still working in these industries in 10 years' time, thinking, well, that's a bloody waste of time, I've done all this stuff, and in fact, we've just gone backwards a bit further. And that's a really, so the thing about personal responsibility is really important, and you can only hold governments to account to a certain degree, because they'll only do what they can within the parameters they're working within. But actually we, as individuals and as academics or as people in business, need to really struggle and make sure we do create that space and that discussion. And then I think we can start to find other solutions.
I'll take 2 more questions. You, and then you, and then we'll wind up. So over to you.
So I've got a very quick statement on growth, and I won't go too long because I do have a question after that. I think the jury still is out whether growth is, whether you can actually separate it from environment and sustainability as a whole. But my statement here, and this requires a lot more unpacking, but the suggestion that it's not growth in itself, but it's the growth in what context and under what provenance. So it's the consumption of what.
Yeah,
so it's if you do have products with provenance, and if you do have things that are more service oriented. So it's the consumption. So for example, in houses, so the leasing of a house that has certain services associated with it, and you only consume those services as opposed to owning the house and owning the products in it. The same thing in an automobile. So electric vehicles would be a very big problem if everybody had to buy them. It's much better if everybody leased them, and that the company who leased it to you is responsible for the batteries that are in those vehicles, and that they get recycled properly or reused somewhere, etc. So,
yeah, no, do you want me to comment on that? Because I agree with you. There's different kinds of growth, and actually I would like to see growth in some sectors and in some ways. But actually I'd like to see personal growth and cultural growth as much as anything else as well. And but the particular growth model we have at the moment has a particular anthropology, in my opinion, which is that it posits man, and this is what Caroline Spellman was saying, man as a consumer, basically nature as resources. And so the best we can do is zero in terms of that. That's why things are called zero carbon and zero this and zero that, because actually we were just a consumer of things. Whereas actually the notion of man as a creator or as a revealer of truth when you do buildings, or as a participant in the process, is completely eliminated by that. So I agree with you that it's a bit sort of easy to say that growth is bad. No, I think we need to re-examine growth. We need to understand the context in which we're doing that. And that what's happened with money particularly, I think has created, and that whole model, what's happened in the last 30, 40 years is extraordinary. There's a great book called The Romantic Economist, which actually Bob recommended to me. Did you ever read it, Bob? Right. You've read it, yeah. It's a very dense book, but it's a very interesting book, and it talks about how in the early 19th century, there was a real debate between Bentham and Coleridge and Wordsworth. And people, again, say, how can poets have a debate about economics? Because actually they were able to do that. It wasn't just poets over here and economists over there, right? It was a proper debate, and it was all about context, actually. It was about understanding things in other values, and that it wasn't all about utility necessarily or self-interest. And that debate actually continued. It shows it continued in the books until 1960s, 70s. And then the utilitarians won, right? And everything now is like based on the notion that people are self-interested, atomized individuals who act in a particular way. And that model has really got hold of us, but it's linked to that money creation thing as well. And there's a kind of Faustian pact, I think, we've made with our economics, which is that we are given the ability to do whatever we want, but we lose our soul. And we have to understand the context of that properly if we're going to actually be able to address issues of growth.
So, can I very quickly, that wasn't quite my question, I just wanted to know, have you heard about Broad Industries and the work that they're doing? I don't know if you've seen the YouTube video of that.
Which industries?
Broad Industries. They're a Chinese-based company out of Changsha. They built that 30-story skyscraper in 90 days, based on a completely modular design that is earthquake. Basically, this guy was inspired by the earthquake in China, where all those kids died in buildings that were really badly built. And so he built a highly sustainable, maybe not something to the spec of what a British consumer would want to live in, but by making it modular, he cut down the waste on the actual process of building, something like 70 or 80%, etc., etc. It's a very interesting case study. I was just wondering whether you had a...
I haven't heard of it, but what people mean by sustainable is, I just think there needs to be a space to discuss that as well. Because I'm not saying that skyscrapers are not sustainable. I'm just saying that that we've already made a value judgment about that. And I think that actually where you're coming from, and that really needs to be examined as well.
Bill?
Sorry, pointing to me. You partly answered what I was going to say, I think, but essentially we seem to have this paradigm where there's government, which is about regulations, and then there's businesses and markets, and that's it. And there doesn't seem to be any sort of moderating forces there. And also, as you mentioned, in terms of local action, there seem to me to be two problems. One of which is cohorting that together in something that can be sufficiently influential and isn't actually atomized. Because often you find, if you look at an issue strategically, then a lot of things which people see locally as different are actually variations on the theme.
Yes.
But the themes don't emerge. The other thing is I've been completely shocked, particularly in the sort of recent recession or shift, because we're not going to come out of this, are we? In the last 5 years, how a lot of local resources have been completely hollowed out. So it's just like you were saying about the industry or whatever. So suddenly the physical resources to empower the local action have gone, because you can't get the metal bent or whatever it happens to be. So can you see any way around that? Because at the moment we just seem to be on a complete slippery slope.
No, but I think what we must do, and I agree, I think there was, in Tim Jackson's book, there was the thing about the Sheffield report, wasn't there, which said, you know, that in 2007, it was a sort of longitudinal study of communities, you know, that the best connected community they could find in 2007 was less well connected than the least well connected community in 1970. And if you're in that situation, and people don't even have a network to go to, how can you start doing community power or community building? You know, we've really undermined a lot of the core values, and I think it's much worse in this country than in many European countries. But the themes actually are, I think, are still the same in a lot of those countries. So no, I don't have any answers at all. My answer is, look, we need to think about the thing, and we need to think about, first of all, what our aims are. And the reason why I've had a bit of stuff about India and all that kind of stuff at the beginning is because we need to reflect on where we're coming from and what we think are important values. You know, because I don't want to be sort of saying we've got to solve climate change. I mean, the whole notion of solving climate change is to me bizarre, because climate change is an output of human imbalance, as far as I'm concerned, rather than something that suddenly come from outer space and it's sort of descended upon us. We've got to fight it. You know, we need to be able to move back, step back from where we are, to really examine, one, our values, and two, our context, and then we can start thinking about change in a different way. And until we start doing that and give ourselves a lot of space and time for that, we will keep on chasing the buck, chasing all these things, and because the rate of doing things is accelerating all the time, you know, and we have to do more and more projects just to keep in the same place. You know, we have to really resist that process very strongly, and because it is a process which is undermining our ability to think clearly about where we are and where we're going.
Can I just speak for the final thing? There's no quick fix.
Sorry?
There's no quick fix.
There's no quick fix, no. It's I think once you start relaxing and start thinking outside the context, then things become clearer. And it's a lot happier way to exist than feeling you're spending your whole time doing things which are counterproductive.
I think that was a very interesting place to finish. I would like to thank the audience and all the people who put such interesting questions. I'd like to thank Bill, previous questioner, for kick-starting that last piece of discussion, wrapping up for Bill. And I would like to thank Neil for giving what I thought was a really interesting presentation and a warning about barriers that fight us that we really expect to innovate our way out of the box that we set us at the moment. So, thank you very much. Now, if it's not a complete contradiction in terms, I would like to suggest that we go upstairs, where there will be professionals, Liberals